Alright, so where I left off, I was thinking it was a 36 millimeter nut for that right there. That turned out to not be the case, so I had to next day a spindle nut socket, and its part number is 16711.01, and it's a spindle nut socket for CJ models, but it's 2 1/16 of an inch. It's real big, and this is kind of a specialty socket. It's thin, so it can fit in there. Impact sockets are too thick and they don't fit, and even then you need like a 52 millimeter. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this on a breaker bar and take that one off. Get this off. There's a little washer back there, and I just use a magnet. And you can take that off, and it has a little tab that rides in the groove on the spindle. So when you get that off, then you got another one of those exact nuts. I'm going to take that off the same way here on this off of the spindle. Alright, so we got this other one off, and then it's got a washer the same as the other. And we pull that off with a magnet, and you see that it rides in that little groove right there. So now that that's off, that's your wheel bearing. This whole rotor and your wheel bearings and hub is going to come off. So we're going to pull all that off. Your inner wheel bearing will just come out. Your back one will stay in there because there's a seal in place that'll hold it there. Alright, so to get to the axle shafts, we got to take off these 6 bolts. These 6 bolts will come off, and then the dust shield will come off, or not the dust shield, the heat shield, and then this whole spindle will come out. And when that spindle comes out, then we'll be able to take out the axle shaft. Alright, so we're going to take these off, and it is it's a 14 millimeter. So I'll pop those 6 off, and then we'll get back to you. Alright, so we got those 6 bolts off. So now this heat shield for your caliper comes off. And then this whole piece right here is your spindle. And to make it easy, I like to spray around it with a little penetrating oil. Get it in there fairly good. And then spray around where you got these studs coming through. Now if it doesn't come out right away, you can let it sit a little bit and reapply a few times, but I'm going to try to get it out of there. So. Alright, so that's your spindle. There's a bearing and a seal in there. Well, my seal popped off with it, but so there's that bearing. Here's your spindle, and right here you're going to have your axle shaft. And all you got to do to get your axle shaft out of there is just kind of tug on it, and then that that's your axle shaft. So we're going to be replacing that axle shaft with some 10 factory chromolyes. I didn't go with the 30 spline, I just went with the 27 splines. That way I can find replacements easily if I need to. Alright, so we're going to prep to put the new axle shaft in there. You just get some grease, put a little around. When you go through there, right around this edge, you want to put a little grease, and then I put a little grease around right here. That way you don't really have, you know, metal dragging. You'll have some grease, it can kind of slide on and you can seat it in those splines a little easier. Alright, so I got some grease on my finger. I'm going to put a little around the edge here. You don't need a lot. Alright, so now we're ready for the axle shaft, so I'm going to dig them out of the box. Alright, so the passenger side is a smaller axle. It's probably about 2 feet long, and your driver's side is quite longer. I've taken out my driver's side already, and that's what your driver's side is going to look like. So since we're replacing this, what we got to do is take off this dust seal from the old one. It's just a little rubber seal. Comes off, and then I'm gonna put some fresh grease on this one, and then I'll just slide it onto the new one. Alright, so we transferred over this dust shield, so now it's just getting the new axle shaft in there. So just slide it in there and kind of reach around there to hold up those splines. Sometimes you have to turn your wheel a little bit to fit it. Alright, so I got the new axle shaft in. I turned off the camera. I had to use a rubber mallet on this end of this shaft to get it through. This new 10 factor axle, the ears where the U-joints go, it's probably about a 1/4 inch wider in steel than the factory one. So it was a little bit of a job to get that one in. I had to kind of tap it and make sure that the gears were spinning freely good and I wasn't pounding into the splines. But I got it through and I wiggled it around a little bit and then it went right in. So now you need your dust seal. And the dust seal has the flat part facing the back. Rides right on top of that axle there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this spindle, and it's got all this old grease in it. I'm going to try to get as much of the old grease out of there as I can, and then I'm going to just rub in some fresh grease. And then I'm going to put the spindle back on. When you put the spindle back on, make sure you remember your dust shield though before you start screwing it back in. Alright, so we re-greased our spindle bearing there, so we're going to, key to this is, you got to slide it on your axle shaft, and then just kind of wiggle it. Alright, that's on there. I popped out 3 of these studs while I was hammering on it, so I have to go in from the back and put these studs, missing studs back in. And then all I'm going to do is take your heat shield. Slide that back over and then retorque those 6 bolts. Alright, so our next step is we got this off, and we got to get this old seal and the old bearings and races out of there. So the easiest way to do it is with one of these tools. This will pop out that seal. You can get underneath it and you can kind of pull on it a little bit. That's the old seal, and that's the old bearing. Alright, so what I did is I cleaned out all the grease out of there that I could, and now it's time to tap out the races. So we're going to tap out the backside race from the front. If you see these little indentions, there's one here and there's one right there. If you get a chisel on that in that little indention there, just pound that with a hammer and just kind of go back and forth. That race will come out. And when you flip the rotor over, just do the same thing, and then the other race will come out. Alright, so I tapped the races loose with the chisel. Just make sure you don't get the side of the hub. Make sure you stay on this race. But now that you've broke it loose, it should just pull out. So that's the old race. I'm going to replace both. I recommend you use Timken bearings and seals. Timken's make by far the best bearings for our Jeeps. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to clean it all out. I'm going to spray a little degreaser in there and get all the old oil out, and then we're going to install the new races. Alright, so now we need to do the bearings. I got these from G2 on Amazon. It's G/2308004, and that's a kit of a seal, 2 races, and 2 bearings. So you got to buy 2 kits if you want to replace all of them on both sides of your Jeep. So what you'll have is that's your wheel bearing, that's your race, and it's angled in, so your bearing fits in there only a certain way. So one of these is going to fit on the spindle in the back, and the best way to do that and to make sure it actually fits before you press it all in is to sit here in front of your spindle. Oh, I got it backwards, so it really goes like that. So you can test your bearing and make sure it slides on. There'll be a little lip, and see that one goes all the way back. The other one won't. The other one's your front one. So I'm going to press this into the back. Alright, so first thing is we need to press this race in to about where it seats right there. So best way to do that is to have one of these tools. I got this thing from Harbor Freight. It's a bearing, race, and seal driver set. It does seals and races, and I think I paid like 25 bucks for it or something, and it's definitely money well spent. It makes this a lot easier, and it'll go in straight. So all you got to do is you find one that matches this race, like that. So to do the race, you do it where this lip is, facing down, and to do a seal, you do the flat. So it turns out it's a 72 millimeter to drive this seal in. So what you want to do is I get it on the tool first, and then I kind of get it all squared up and set it in there. And make one more time, take that wheel bearing and make sure it's sitting in there right. If you put the race in there backwards, then you got a whole nother problem on your hands. So now I just kind of start tapping it in. Let me check it. It's going a little crooked on this side, so I'm going to just tap it just a little bit. Now it'll make a different sound when it gets all the way to the bottom. It'll be like almost like you're hitting something hard, like concrete. See how the sound just changed right there? So now you kind of make sure it's seated all the way around. And alright, so that race is in there. So then this bearing, once we grease it, will drop in there like that. And then there's an outer seal on there that'll go on there. I don't have the new one out yet, but I'll show you when I pull that one out of the package. So next we gotta flip this thing over, and then we are assuming this is the front wheel bearing. So we're gonna go over here and check it on the spindle, make sure it slides on there and it's the right thing. Alright, so it does. So now we're gonna have to drive in this race. This race uses the same size so same process. See how the sound changed? Alright, so it's all the way down there. Make sure the bearing rides in there, which it does. The front one, it doesn't sit totally flush in the race. It kind of sticks out just a little bit. The rear one, if you look at the rear one, that one rides almost completely flush in that race. So next on the agenda here is we are going to have to pack the wheel bearings with grease. I'm just using this Durablend synthetic blend Valvoline stuff. So it was on the shelf local. You can use full synthetic, but I don't know, I'm not too worried about it. It's a Jeep, so this thing will barely ever see over 70. Alright, I'm not gonna record me greasing up these wheel bearings. There's a lot of information on YouTube about. Alright, my battery cut out on my camera. So I'm not gonna pack these wheel bearings on camera. All you do is take a glob of that grease and put it in your hand. And you see this is the thin side in between that bearing and kind of race. That's the thick side. So take the thick side and just kind of rub it in your palm like so with the grease, and you'll start seeing it come out of here. Once you get it all around there, then I rub a little all around the bearing itself, and then it's packed. But there's a lot of videos on how to do it if you've never done it before. Alright, so now it's come to put in the seal. So all you do is I flip this thing around to where it's flat, and I found, you know, the one that fits the best. And then all we're going to do is kind of get it started. going in a little crooked. I'm going to try to kind of level it out with this. So that's pretty much what you don't want. You don't want it to go in there crooked and be up on one side. So I'm going to see if I can just kind of tap down that side with the hammer. Just go real slow if you do hit the outside with a hammer. I'm not hitting it very hard. Alright, so it's kind of leveling out, so I'm going to put this on there. Alright, so I'm straight all the way around the edge there. So my grease came out. That's alright. Alright, so next we're going to flip it over. And I already packed that wheel bearing. What we're going to do is we're going to get a decent amount of grease in there. There's a little groove in there in between, and that's kind of what I'm trying to fill up. You don't want to put too much grease or else you'll kind of overheat your bearings, but if you fill up that ridge right there, you'll be all right. All right, so I'm putting a little bit of grease on this race in there, getting it ready. All right, so the other wheel bearing though, you don't put that on until you get this assembly onto your spindle. So that's what we'll do right now, is get it on the spindle. All right, so we're gonna slide this whole assembly on the spindle, and it just kind of barely fits on there. So you gotta just kind of wiggle it a little bit and push it really slowly to get that bearing seated. If you push it on there at an angle or something, it'll get hard, and then you got to start over. So there you go. I got it on there, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean out some of this grease on these threads. And your first washer is this. So what I do is I put a little bit of grease on everything going back in. Alright, so now we're ready for the wheel bearing. So this wheel bearing's all packed. That goes in first with the, I don't know, the taller side. It tapers. You want that taller side facing you. Alright, so you get that seated in the race. And then we're going to put a little bit of grease on it direct. And then our washer with the little notch goes in your axle shaft notch. Like that. Then next is your nut here. I'm going to put that on. That nut, you want to torque it to about 50 foot-pounds. And then when you torque it to 50 foot-pounds, just back it off until your rotor spins freely with, you know, no real bad drag. Take those gloves off. I already got this set up for 50 pounds, I believe, which I do. So make sure everything's spinning right first. And then you want to torque this to 50. Alright, so that's 50. And you'll see if you try to spin this now, this side's actually pretty good. What you don't want is any side-to-side play either. So I'm going to just loosen that just a little bit, and it's going to be good. Alright, so that's good. So now the next one, you put this lock washer in. It's got a tab underneath that keeps that bolt from spinning. So you get it on there, and then there's another lock washer for that, or a nut. Tighten that up, and then you're going to want to tighten that one to 50 pounds as well. Alright, so it's at 50 pounds, so we're going to see if we can spin this. A little bit of drag, but it's all new grease and all new bearings, so it'll probably loosen up a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen this one just a little bit too. I'm probably ending up with both of these bolts, probably at about 45 foot-pounds. Alright, so now that's set, and the next thing is to put the hubs back on. Alright, so we're going to put on our new hubs. I got some Super Winch hubs to replace my factory ones. They give you a gasket, and they give you the spare bolts. They only have 2 bolted in there. So to install this, it's pretty easy, but what you're going to do is take the T15 Torx and loosen it up. Now these hubs don't need any grease, so all you got to do is install them. Alright, so you take this apart like so. This piece you got to slide on here and then put your C-clip right there. And when you put that C-clip on there, you should really wear safety glasses, because if it flies off, it'll probably take your eye out. Oh, you need the gasket first. So they include a little gasket. Easy enough. So you slide this on your axle shaft. And that little pin there, you can use a pry bar, kind of pry your axle out. Get your snap ring pliers. Easiest way to get this one back on is kind of pry out on it, and then put this snap ring right in between what you're prying, and then now it's on there. So now that piece is on there, what you got to do is you got to put in back your 5 bolts. And these bolts, you definitely want to put Loctite on them, because they're notorious for loosening up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick Loctite on them, and put these 5 bolts back in, and then we'll put the top of the... Alright, so the Loctite, use blue thread lock on those 5, and then when we put these little Torx back into the top of the hub body, we're going to use blue Loctite on that too, because you will maybe have to get these off again. If you got to change a U-joint on the trail. Alright, so to just show you on this last one, this is about how I do it. I just run some blue Loctite on there. give it a fair amount. Like I said, these things are notorious for loosening up. So run it in there. It's still the 14 socket. I just get them all in there as tight as I can get them, just with the extension, and then I go in with the ratchet and just get them fairly snug. It'll move on you, so you can just put a pry bar like that, and it can only go so far, and then just tighten them in a star pattern like you tighten your lug nuts. These don't need to be torqued super tight. I'm not using a torque wrench, but my guess. Alright, so we got those on. Next step is to get, so you want it 4x2, and to tighten these up, they're Torx, and they use a T15. So what you're going to do is you're going to put a little Loctite on those too. I'm going to just kind of cinch them up, and then we got to use a torque wrench, and I'm going to torque wrench them to 30 inch-pounds. So it's a pretty low rating. If you don't have a torque wrench that can go that low, then you probably want to just kind of not even get it to hand tight, and then maybe like a quarter of a turn past. So I'm going to go around and I'm going to get all those in. Alright, so I got them all in there a little snug. I got my inch-pound torque wrench set to 30 inch-pounds. Alright, and just do this in a star pattern. Alright, so those are all in there. Turn the knob, make sure it turns. What's nice about this one is it's only a quarter of a turn. The other one you had to turn it all the way around. This one you just barely turn it and then you're locked. Alright, so next step is putting the brakes back together. Alright, so I left the rear pad on the whole time. Just needs a little of adjustment. So what I'm going to do is this caliper lube, I'm going to just add a little bit back to the brake pads here. So, well, it looks like my back one popped off. So I just bend this clip out of the way and put a little grease on that one too. Take our brake pad and try not to get any of that lube that you just did on your rotor or the front side of your pads. Alright. So now that your pads are on there, we have to compress the piston in your caliper. They make special tools for that, but if you don't have it, the C-clamp works really good. So you just gotta put it on that side, and then go ahead and tighten that up. Make sure you're not messing with your brake line. When you tighten it, see this piston is moving in. You're compressing it again so you'll be able to get it back on. Alright, so I felt it bottom out. Take it off. So now it's going to be time to get this caliper back on with these two sliders. You want to rub both of these sliders down real good with some of this caliper lube. That's kind of what allows your caliper to slide. So take off my bungee cord. The easy way to remember which way your caliper goes is this bleeder screw is always up. So now we just slide that on, and then we're going to lube up both of these pins and put these pins back in the back of the caliper there. Alright, so now we're going to reinstall our diff cover. Here's my new lube locker gasket, and I'll put this up here. It's kind of a good tightening sequence. They don't include a torque spec. I'm going to torque it to about 29 foot-pounds. You can do anywhere between about 25 and 30-ish. So this is easy enough. You just take the bolts, you know, take your other cover and stick it back up there and hand tighten all of them and then torque it to about 30. Alright, so we got the cover back on. Everything's torqued. I torqued it all to 20 and then I torqued everything else. I went back through it and torqued it to about 28. Alright, so I have the fill plug out, and what I suggest is you buy one of these things from the local AutoZone. It's a fluid quart pump, I guess. So it fits right on top. You screw this thing off and you screw this on, and you pump it, and that fills up your fluid rather than try to get some weird angle at it. So we're going to go ahead and fill it with fluid until it starts running out of this hole here, and then we'll put the plug back in, and the plug goes back in at about 20 to 25 foot-pounds. Alright, it's all done. I just need to put the tires back on and lower it. I'm going to put the tires on. I'm going to torque them as much as I can. I'm going to raise it up, take out the jack stands, lower it back to the ground. And then I'm going to torque all my lug nuts to 80 foot-pounds. Then I'm going to take it out for a test ride. Before you do that, you want to pump your brakes a few times to get your pads squeezed up. And I'm sure I probably got a little grease on some of my rotors and stuff. I wiped them off the best I could. But for the first bit, you want to stop kind of, you know, safer than normal. Stop way back there. For the initial testing anyways, I'm going to drive it around the block for about 10 or 15 minutes. That's pretty much it. I mean, we got new hubs, we got new axle shafts, we got new wheel bearings. So the front end's pretty rebuilt. I just got gears. So it should be ready for travels